Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Empathy Podcast. My name's Leanne Butterworth, and today we're speaking about empathy and midwifery with Liz Wilkes from My Midwives. So, learning about the role of a midwife, the value of relationships in midwifery care, but more importantly, the value of what's called continuity of care as a midwife. So, the importance of that to mums, to bubs, to families, to societies, and we learn about what continuity of care is, how it's different to medical care, how the value of it and why it is so important, and why relationships are such an important part of the midwifery continuity of care journey. My name's Leanne Butterworth, and this is the Empathy Podcast. Hello, Liz, and welcome.
Hi, Leanne. It's great to be here. Fantastic to have a chat.
I'm so looking forward to this one. This is very close to my heart. So, Liz, can you please give us a bit of an introduction about who you are, what you do?
I'm a private practice midwife, and so I started off in midwifery continuity of care, which is where a midwife looks after the same woman from early in pregnancy right through labour and birth and through their postnatal period. And I've kind of always worked in that model, both within the hospital sector and in private practice providing home birth care, basically for most of my career. But I was heavily involved in maternity reforms and getting Medicare for midwives in sort of the 2010 sort of national maternity reforms. And so from there I set up what's now Australia's largest private midwifery practice, My Midwives. And we have two practices in Brisbane, two in Melbourne and one in Toowoomba. And we provide that model, that midwifery continuity of care, to women who sort of similar to a GP. So kind of like they can just come in, self-refer to us and have their care with us going into hospital with them, and actually, for want of a better word, delivering their babies or looking after them in birth, through their actual birth period and then through their postnatal period, so that they see the same person throughout. And that model of care has been sort of demonstrated to be kind of the gold standard in maternity care for a long time. But obviously governments and funding and power and all the things that are interesting in the world have kind of prevented it from really getting a good sort of stronghold in the maternity service in Australia.
Yeah. So you mentioned continuity of care there, and
yeah.
I have two children one was born 2010, one was born 2012, and I had, to a large degree, that continuity of care model, which is that you see the same midwife before, during, and after. And it made such a difference. I did it through the birth centre, so the Royal Brisbane Birth Centre, and I loved it, especially for my second, who was a true caseload continuity of care baby. And I became so passionate about this that I became what's called a consumer advocate. So I would be out there like championing for women. So if we go back to continuity of care, a lot of people, I'm assuming, think that they have that with their doctor. So they go and choose an obstetrician. Is that the same thing?
Look, no, it's not. I don't want to, bag that model, because obviously there are some benefits to having the same obstetrician throughout. But the difference is that the obstetrician isn't actually beside the woman throughout their labour, and they're certainly not sort of beside them throughout their postnatal period either. So really the continuity from an obstetric model really rests with the antenatal period, so the pregnancy, so they're looking after them, same person looking after them through the pregnancy, and kind of on call and in there for their labour and birth. But they're not actually walking alongside them for that whole journey. So it's not sort of down into that really strong relational care. There's definitely a level there, but it doesn't actually dig that little bit deeper so that they're actually walking alongside them through their whole labour. And then, obviously, as you're a mum, you'll know that 6 weeks after birth is where the rubber really hits the road. And look,
yes.
those of the listeners that are mums will get this, that period is where things really sort of are tough, and where women really need that day in, day out support. And obviously an obstetrician can only really see them, they see them in hospital for a couple of days and then a 4 or a 6 week check, and that's kind of it. There's not much in that space. So whilst there's a level of continuity, it's just not comparing apples and apples. It's a different sort of model altogether, really.
Yeah. For my example with Zara is she went on nursing strike at 3 days old. So I'm at 1 a.m, I'm feeding my child with an eyedropper, and my beautiful midwife was with me trying to get this child to attach. And it happened and it worked. But if I didn't have her by my side, I don't know where we would have ended up.
And that's the thing that women say. They say that it's those early hours of the morning in the postnatal period where there is nothing else. You can't just ring up, and pop in and see your GP or your obstetrician or whatever. It's the FaceTime calls in the middle of the night, or the coming to your home in the middle of the night, and walking you through whatever process it is or whatever it is that's causing the challenge.
So you mentioned a moment ago the relationships and how important that is. Let's go back further then, and let's talk about before how to strengthen a relationship and the value of the relationship. What is the value of the continuity of care model, and why don't a lot of people know about it?
Look, the value is that it is the depth of relational care. So, we can talk about what that is in a minute, but the reason that people don't know about it is because, for whatever reason, in Australia, motherhood sits in a funny sort of a place in terms of even our valuing of mothering as an experience. And I guess, we can dig into that in all sorts of political ways or all sorts of philosophical ways or whatever. But we've never really, once we went into sort of medicalising care, we've never really backtracked and looked at what parts of the medical model are really important and are really valuable. And of course, there are, hundreds of them. Like, we don't want people dying from sepsis, for example, so there's elements, but we've never gone back and unpacked the fact that whilst there's lots of really good things within that there's lots of things that we've lost in changing to a very medicalised model. And the things that we've lost are that sort of depth of relational care. And obviously in other countries, they've kept that. There's models of care where maternity care is focused around midwifery, with medicine coming into it where it's needed all around the world. And lots of cultures value that as well. So, but Australia, for whatever reason, kind of, I suppose, has gone down that very Western and possibly even Western to sort of an American Western kind of model, because we've got some private and some public and, some mixes in funding models, and we could get into all that. Geez, it's not really, but that has meant that we've kind of stayed in this space that is not really looking at the relationship side of it. We're actually just looking at the patient, for want of a better word again, the patient's sort of medical journey. And so that's lost a big chunk, and that's something that people just don't actually investigate, possibly because of where we put mothering, and whether it is that or whether it's just that they just have not educated themselves in it, because there is a growing, body of research around this, and certainly a growing body of, people that are getting recognition around this model of care, but it's just not, it's not accepted into the sort of mainstream, totally normalised part of care just at this particular point in time.
Yeah. So do you think that comes from this risk profile as well, of birth being seen as high risk, high pain, a negative experience, because that's a lot of what I see and what I hear. I hear people, I remember being asked, and I said, I actually enjoyed giving birth. I
Yeah.
genuinely enjoyed giving birth because it was beautiful. And I've had people say, you mean, and I said, I don't want drips in my arm. I'm not interested in that. If it happens, it happens. And I trust my midwife so implicitly that I knew that if she went, oh, I'd be okay, where are we going?
Yeah.
But I had somebody say, you mean you'd rather the agony of childbirth than some drips in your arm? I went, it wasn't agony. It wasn't. And we don't talk about that. You don't hear those stories. You hear
No.
a risk and a scary and dangerous and I don't want the pain. I want it to go away. I trust this person. But
Yeah.
I don't think people are in that mindset that we have to
No.
question.
We're
We don't
definitely
question doctors.
No, we're definitely in a cycle around it that I spend, time in terms of education, whether it be, via social media, whether it be by classes with people, traveling around, doing all kinds of things, because we're definitely in a cycle where women hear stories that are really negative via media, by their friends, by whatever. They've become totally distrusting of the birthing process. They're distrustful of their birthing process. And so therefore they distrust their body. They accept whatever help they can get from wherever. They end up with a very medicalized negative birth experience. They haven't used any of the tools, the physiological tools that our bodies have allowed us to survive as a society or as a human race. They don't rely on any of those things. They accept all the help that they can get. They then have a negative medicalized experience, and then they go on to the next person. And that is an actual cycle that that those of us that are really involved in physiology and really involved in birthing as the sustainability of our planet around birth, that is what we're trying to actually, that's what we're up against really at the end of the day. And that's a massive job. It's a difficult job. And that's just the reality of it, and what we're trying to sort of impact at this particular part of society's journey.
So what are the risks involved in the medical model for mums and bubs?
Yeah. So look, we don't even know. We're getting a growing body of research that's demonstrating all kinds of stuff. So there's stuff around the fact that if we don't have natural oxytocin, which is the hormone that's controls the whole labour process, but also controls bonding, feeding, and love, and is involved in sex, is involved in all kinds of stuff. If we don't have that at the level that we need it to be during birth, we actually don't know what the impact then is ongoing on that baby and that mother-baby dyad. And we're seeing, we could even say and look, there is, it's difficult to do research around this, but we see in nature, in mammalian society, where if a mother and baby dyad is disrupted, the mother actually doesn't love the baby and walks away from it. Now, obviously, we are not that dramatic in human society, but what that breaking that bond is a very, very significant sort of foundational aspect to the family's journey as a family. So what does that then mean for society? That's one level. We could then go into all of the human biome, like what are we doing to the human biome when we're disrupting birth? We can see that we're getting lots of research coming through now around challenges in immunity, allergies, all that kind of stuff through disrupting the human biome during birth. And
that's skipping the vaginal part of it.
That's seeding in the vaginal part. Yep, that's right. But, even just looking at the mother having the baby onto her skin immediately after birth or not, and what that actual process does in terms of this response. So not just being born through the vagina and vaginal seeding and all those kinds of interesting, crazy kind of topics that you could do a whole podcast on, but, even having that baby on your skin afterwards, and what having not bathing the baby for a particular length of time. And so there's all of that. And then we can get into the really medicalised stuff of saying, okay, so if we don't have relational-based care, we know that one of the leading causes of maternal death in the first 12 months after the perinatal period is suicide. So we know that not having relational care is impacting women's anxiety and postnatal depression. So we've got a whole bank of really strong science and stuff around medical models, or what not necessarily even medical models, but the whole of maternity care structure, what it's doing at the moment. And then we've kind of got this more developing research around what we're missing out on because we're not actually looking at physiology. So it's a massive topic in itself. It's just really significant.
And there's that culture as well of, like you said before, about dismissing and almost belittling motherhood, of that not validating birth trauma.
Yeah.
And
look,
because, at least you have a healthy baby. I'm not doing well. I had things done to me without my consent. I didn't personally, but they're the stories that I've heard.
Yeah.
And at least you have a healthy baby. And they're going, I'm not okay. I'm not okay.
And that's where, the whole elements of birth debriefing and spending time with the care provider so that's where that sort of whole relational care through the whole continuum really is so valuable, because you've got somebody that was present in your birth, understands, and look, sometimes birth does not go the way that you want it to go. And that's, absolutely, unfortunately, even with the best. But if you've actually had the chance to unpack what's gone on and talk about different parts of it, and you've had control over the decisions that you were making, even if it's unfolding in an unexpected way, it's a very different outcome at the end. The woman is in a very different space at the end, but we're not valuing that. We should be valuing it, but we're not valuing it particularly well. I think we're these sorts of conversations are coming out more and more in different areas of society, and I think we are starting to realise how troubling, but how important it is. But we've got a long way to go.
Yeah, and I think also the relationship between fear and physiology.
Oh, and see, that's that. If we go into that in terms of the whole oxytocin process, as soon as you've got fear in the space and that whole really difficult, fearful sort of adrenaline producing situation in the space, you're actually getting rid of your oxytocin. You've got, they're competing for receptors. It's just so even on that physiological level, it's there, but we've got it in even the decision making process and what the care providers, the people around you are doing, and we could just go on and on in terms of all of that.
The thing that gets me is we are, and you are, working against a system and working against, it is a system, it's an industry that we know has implications for mum and baby. And you're looking at this going, look, you want to scream from the rooftops. The relational model, the continuity of care model, has the absolute best outcomes for mums and bubs. How do you do that in terms of being a midwife and building relationships? What goes into building relationships with your clients?
Look, I think the thing is that it starts at the very beginning. That's a very stupid thing to say, isn't it? It starts at the very beginning. It's a very good place to start. No, it's what's brought a woman into your space, into your locus, really. That is what defines, how that relationship develops. So women can either come into the space and start that relationship journey from a very fresh, first-time mum, quite a, joyful, lovely experience, or they can come into it with a very significant amount of baggage. And it's the same as developing any relationship, whether it's with a mate, whether it's with a partner, whatever. You're starting with what's gone on in the past. And so sitting and sort of trying to unpack that and recognizing what parts of that have contributed to where that individual is at that particular point in time. So it's the same as every single relationship that we develop. But you're also recognizing that you're going into a journey with them of one of the most significant experiences that they're going to have as a person. So it's a huge responsibility, and it's a huge sort of learning curve about each other, I guess, that you undertake right from the very, very beginning, because they're learning about you, they're learning about the model of care, they're learning about what's going to impact their birth, their experience, and you're trying to really quickly, but it develops over time, but you're quickly getting an understanding of where they've actually come to when they're coming into your space and into your office or your clinic or wherever you are, because that's what sets that sort of foundation for the information that needs to be shared and the relationship, the feelings that need to be shared. And obviously it's such a heartfelt profession, if you like, because you can't just go into it with your head thinking logically about whatever's going on. You're actually coming into that space with a whole lot of stuff from your heart, from your soul, from your values, and all of that, and being able to exchange that and learn that about each other in a fairly rapid time frame, but with a very important, really critical sort of end goal, because you've got, their birth, they're only going to do that the once, every birth is an individual experience. So, yeah, it's a fairly fraught and important kind of journey, really.
Does the language that you use within My Midwives sound different to what you would hear in a medical model?
Oh, look, so everything is different. So, the space is different, the language is different, the relationship is different, because really you're looking at a partnership model that is, I suppose, a professional friendship is the way you could almost describe it, because you're actually going through and learning about a person in a way that is far different to if you're just on a ward and or you're a doctor and you're just kind of getting the clinical, what's in front of your face, you're doing sets of obs, you're doing stuff. This is about what happened to you as a young child potentially, or what's happened in your life that's brought you to this part of your journey. And that develops over sort of, when I say 9 months, I mean however long that journey is in the beginning. Women often come to a midwife at sort of that 8 to 10 week mark. So, from about 8 to 10 weeks to sort of 40 weeks gestation, you're building this sort of blooming relationship about talking about feelings and stuff that is nothing to do with the actual what's your blood pressure like or whatever, but you're looking at how that sort of stuff impacts the blood pressure. You still got to do all the medico stuff, like it's not like you're putting that out the window, but you're also building this relationship on top of that at the same time.
It's so interesting you say that. I mean, I've heard we talk about this a fair bit when we do empathy training, is the language that we use.
Yeah.
And words like deal with or manage. So as a person to be managed when I was in the hospital as a consumer advocate, I heard people who were larger women just being referred to as the BMI. Like completely removing the humanity from that individual, and it's bringing that humanity back, it's bringing that individualism back, it's bringing that beauty back to motherhood and giving birth and that empowerment.
And look, that's the thing really, is that we sort of say that in this model it's not like you're on a train into a particular sort of consumer, like a process, that you're not a process. You're not on a journey that goes this step, that step, this step, that step. It is about individualized care and looking at exactly what it is that makes up your uniqueness, because the woman is actually expert in herself. Like she knows herself better than we're ever going to know her. And it's about making sure that is able to grow. And we say, we want to awaken and inspire the unique inner power of every single woman. That's part of our sort of mantra, our value system at My Midwives, because every single person has got something inside them that's a unique and powerful part to them. Now, for some women, that doesn't even come out in their birth, or it doesn't even necessarily come out in their feeding or whatever. It might be something that's just a spark that's awakened to something else for their further journey. And I know it sounds all a bit, sounds a bit sort of like we're being quite hippie or whatever, but that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to make sure that every single woman comes through that part of the early mothering period with something that has actually enabled them to access something within themselves that helps them in that journey. So that's a really important part of the My Midwives kind of ethos, I suppose.
Yeah. And I think it's that holistic approach as well, that the dad and the other kids and do you incorporate them? Because
so look,
a lot of dads feel like very on the outside, like they're just tits on a ball, they say.
Yeah, so we from our perspective, the partner's job in the space is very different within midwifery and within sort of standard maternity care, because in standard maternity care, the partners are having to think about what's going on, who's doing what, almost a on guard. What does this mean? Is she okay? Whereas we sort of try and make sure that the partners are totally freed up from that sort of feeling to just do their job of loving the birthing woman, because at the end of the day, the partner is the person in the room that actually knows and loves the woman the absolute most of anybody that's in the space. So if we can actually just facilitate that love, that comes through in spades in terms of all of the endorphins that are there, all of the oxytocin that's building, and so forth. Likewise with the siblings, I mean, we see the most gorgeous things, obviously in different spaces and different times, different ages of children, all of that sort of stuff. But where siblings are actually just given the run of the show, so to speak, they do the most incredible job of bringing oxytocin into that room. And if the woman is actually in her own space and in her own power, and they can sort of feed into that, it's just mind-boggling. And what an experience for them. They rarely ever look back on anything, as it being traumatic or difficult or whatever. They just love it. They love being there. They think it's just so amazing. So that's something that we can, it's not for everybody to have other children there, at different situations, but certainly where they want to be involved, it's a really great experience for everyone.
So with My Midwives, just to clarify, do you have a birth centre, or do you do home births, or do you do where do women who work with what's the word?
Yep.
Contract. Engage.
So when they've engaged to My Midwives Midwife, it really depends on where they want to birth. So we have visiting access, so we can admit women into a range of different hospitals. So women can be admitted as I don't want to use the word patient, our client, they're admitted by us. So instead of having a doctor admitting them, they have a My Midwives Midwife admitting them. But we also do have some space outside of hospitals that is available for women who want to birth in a space that is sort of centralised and allows a birth centre type space or a birth centre space, distinct from birth centres in a hospital, like an outside birth centre. And we also have women that birth in their own home. And look, it really is dependent on so many things. And look, you can't throw out risk, because risk is part of the story. There are going to be women for whom having a baby outside of a hospital is a really bad idea. And you have to say that, because obviously there are circumstances where that is really, the reality. And that's that's why we've got great hospitals around us. But, for many women, they do want to have baby outside the hospital. That's a possibility with My Midwives. And so, it just depends in the different practices as to what sort of level people choose. And I must admit that COVID has had a massive impact on that, because there is sort of a increase in women choosing not to go into hospital for a variety of reasons, including, limitations and so forth. So, it's really, I guess, the beauty of it is that you can choose your care provider, and then whatever evolves through the course of your pregnancy, it's catered for. So, you need a cesarean section, it's catered for. You want to have a home birth, it's catered for. So it's not something that you have to worry about when you're actually picking your care provider at the beginning.
Yeah, absolutely. So is there resistance to continuity of care from midwives themselves?
From other midwives?
Not within My Midwives, obviously, but within the broad community?
Yeah. Look, I mean, there is a resistance, probably even, there's probably a resistance broadly that you have to give a lot. Like you have to have a fairly clear heart, and you do have to give a lot to be on call and involved in continuity of care models. And so for some midwives, they see that as a barrier. I don't ever see that as a barrier, whereas I see that as it's just a small problem to be actually moved around. I've done continuity with tiny little babies, and you actually, and big kids now, but you actually need to just be able to think outside the box a little bit as to the way that you actually work around that. And I think that if more midwives were kind of open to that, we would certainly see more midwives stepping into continuity of care if they looked at ways of job sharing and ways of, because obviously you can't always be available every single day, 365 days of the year. So it's about developing relationships and being available when the women really need you, and saying at the times where they don't really need you, hey, look, I'm going to go and do whatever, have a weekend off, whatever it might be, and trying to just plan that within your life. And it works really super well. But that's probably where some of the barriers exist, between midwives that are working not in continuity of care and those that are working in continuity of care.
Yeah. So by the sound of it, the role of the midwife, and if we talk about empathy from a midwife, that role of the midwife to have a human-centered approach, to work on building relationships, has such a huge positive impact for the mum, the bub, the family, the other siblings, the long-term health of both mum and bub. So then if we talk about for a second empathy for a midwife, you've just talked about being able to juggle and be there, and that's often difficult but very rewarding. What's your favourite thing about being a midwife?
Oh, look, my favourite thing about being a midwife is seeing women a long way past this actual part that we're talking about. So my favourite thing is seeing them when they've got a 2-year-old or a 5-year-old or a teenager, and they still remember and recognise the impact that having midwifery care had on them as a mother. So it can, and it sounds a bit sort of over dramatic, but it can set down the whole pattern of being a mother for a woman.
Oh, absolutely.
And look, I've seen women who, for example, have had, say, this particular woman that's come to mind, 4 babies, not in midwifery continuity of care. She had a really complex social past, and she ended up having her 5th baby in midwifery continuity of care and breastfed that baby she'd never breastfed before, and so forth and so on. And seeing her some years down the track and her reflection on her mothering, not only for that 5th child that she breastfed and that she did, but what the impact then had been to the way, the style, what she was doing with her older children as a result of that final birth, was so profound that, it just blows me away even thinking about it now, because she had changed as a mother just because of the care that she'd received in that midwifery continuity of care model. And look, how can you even how can you explain it? Why can't we bottle it? Because, that's what, whether it benefits the children, whether it benefits the mother, it doesn't actually matter because the whole of it benefits society. So it means we change the foundations, the fundamental view of society. And I guess, going right off piece sort of thing, segueing off here, some of the countries like with Inuits in Canada, they had, they've done trials of providing midwifery in their actual community, and the changes on that society around things like domestic violence, drug and alcohol use, all that, where you've got really contained societies and you can actually measure it. It's just enormous. So, because the whole mothering changes, the family dynamic changes, everything changes in that whole society. So, we can't just kind of write it off and go, well, this isn't important, because it is really, really important.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like I said, I went through the birth centre, and I went through with 8 of the most beautiful women, and the support of that group of women and the support of our midwives, and how we still talk about our midwives is beautiful. We actually wrote a book for them. And we presented them with a book that was all of the recipes and birth stories and pictures, and and to me that was so life-changing, of feeling part of something and feeling empowered and feeling beautiful and not feeling afraid. And these women were on the same journey, and the midwives were on the same journey as well. There was no part of it that was isolating.
Yeah. And look, that's a massive thing. And I think that the other thing, when we talk about isolation, particularly, at the moment when people are in their houses and lockdowns and whatever, we have to look at community and what midwifery does for community and for bringing everybody together, everybody into the space, whether it's, a real space, as in, they're all in the same house, but it's also that feeling of being part of something, that feeling of being in a community that is really, really pivotal to the way that we provide our care.
Yeah. The question that comes up is then, how do you do all of this and yourself face trauma? Because you would have negative experiences as well. Like, how do you invest and keep deepening relationships when there's always risk, there's always trauma, there's always you know what I'm asking.
I do know what you're asking. And look, people sort of think about trauma as being, the really catastrophic events. They're few and far between. But it's the trauma of someone actually experiencing something they don't want to experience, or the trauma of the relationship, the relationship breakdown, which occurs in all relationships, So I think the thing that's really important for us as midwives is the self-care that we do and the way that we actually build team, and working with teams of people to actually, develop those relationships and to talk and to connect and to nurture each other. Because if you don't have that, then you're giving from an empty bucket. There's nothing left there to give. And so we've got to build that in ourselves, and we do. And that's how midwives who sustain in this way of working have usually really strong relationships with other people. They usually have very strong sense of themselves, and that they work with, whether it's formally or informally, to make sure, and probably both really, to be fair, to look at the ways that they can actually strengthen and build their own internal capacity and support themselves internally, and then support others in the team. And look, that's a fascinating thing, the teams of midwives working together and how they actually support each other. Because obviously, if they don't support each other well, then again, you can have some really destructive, toxic sort of environments. And we see that, unfortunately, in hospitals where, and not always just hospitals, lots of places in society where, the relationships are not based in those really sort of foundational values and what you're doing for yourself.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we talk about a lot in empathy training is it's one thing, especially let's say in a midwife, it's one thing to continually give and give and give, but empathy is not give to the client. It's you've got to fill your own cup first. You have to have those, and so it's empathy for yourself, empathy for your team, and that's how you get and whether it's a customer or a client, you get the best results for them, and they get the best results when you do put yourself first, when you put your team's needs and you have that value of the team. So in My Midwives, it sounds like mental health is a conversation that you have.
It's a constant conversation. One of our values, like, in our core values is team, and we're constantly looking at ways to, and I'll use the word invest, but to invest in our team and to talk to each other about how each other are doing and what that actually looks like in pairs. So, like midwives working with their backup, in the small groups, like the little pods within each practice, at a practice level, and then at a whole organisational level. So, knowing where people are at is really important to us, and that is, it's quite interesting because a lot of midwives that have had some sort of period of mental health issue or challenge actually are often drawn into this model because they have then done a lot of work in that space, and they really get it. They really have that sort of layer of understanding that perhaps, is I'm not saying it's lacking in the broader community, but perhaps it's not as well dived into and well developed in some people. We talk actively about developing our muscle in certain areas, and the areas are looking at each other and going, okay, identifying for ourselves, I need some help to develop my muscle to say no to this colleague or just do this in this time, and we look across the top of our team and say all the time, what do we need to do here to change this up? And we work in small groups to make sure that we're impacting that all the time.
It sounds so beautiful. It sounds like what we want, not only for a birthing mums, but that's what we want business to be. That's what we want all of this to be. We want to be encouraged to take care of ourselves, be encouraged to take care of our team members, and it shouldn't have to be in a space that is high risk. It should, and I hate the word should, but it needs to be across the board where we're encouraged to take care of ourselves. So apart from, let's say, the team, how else do you encourage your midwives to take care of themselves?
So we spend a lot of time talking about all sorts of different aspects because fatigue is a big issue. So fatigue management and time out is a big issue. And because obviously when we're working, you can be with a woman for a long time. And so you need to talk about that. You need to talk about, well, how are we doing that? What are they doing with the rest of their life, the rest of their, whether it's food, exercise, their own personal relationships, their family, all of that sort of stuff. And that all needs to be and is talked about, frequently. We have specific times where we actually do that formally, as in different team meetings and things like that. We have every group has a little huddle where they're actually check in with each other. But, obviously we can always do better. And I think that one of the things that we're really working on at the moment is how that pair structure actually does check in on each other's fatigue levels, because I think that, we are often midwives are goers, we want to do the right thing by our clients, but it's really important that those sorts of things sleep, that we're actually checking in. Okay, so what's happening here with literally not just fatigue, days off, but how are you sleeping? Like, what's your sleep like? What's this look like? And getting down into the sort of tin tacks of what can we do in that space to make sure that people are well. And where they're not, actually addressing that in a non-judgmental sort of a way, because obviously there are times where, I'm sort of making it sound wine and roses. It's not always wine and roses, and obviously everybody's life, there's our team in Melbourne, for example, this last few weeks has been, in full PPE for every single birth in hospital because of where the risk status was for the particular hospital they're in. How do you sleep when you get out of that? Like, how do you get home? How do you relax? Like, what are you doing? Are you exercising? Are you getting outside? Are you getting fresh air? How is that looking? And actually having those direct conversations with people and encouraging them to do it with each other to make sure that they're actually properly checking in, not just kind of glossing over the surface of it.
Yeah. And it's that feeling of safety as well. I mean, as well as safety for mums, but safety for your colleagues to be able to say, I'm not sleeping so good, and just that level of trust. And so that's the sense that I'm getting, is that sense of trust and safety and belonging and respect. That means that you can genuinely be honest and say, I'm not sleeping very well. I do need help. Or if you're in a good place, being able to offer that support and be vulnerable.
Yeah. And look, I think the thing for me, is the trust and the fact that, we get a lot of the people that join the team as quite, well, not junior midwives, but not, we've got a lot of people obviously because of the level of care that we provide that are quite a ways down the line in their careers. So they've had a lot of time to develop these strategies and to do this kind of work. But then we get the newcomers that are coming in, that are coming through the ranks, and we encourage that for sustainability, obviously, and, for a lot of reasons. But getting them to be able to develop that trust, to actually be able to be open about where they're at and, and it is us, the senior midwives, the senior clinicians, showing our vulnerabilities and being able to be really open about where we are. And that's something that I take really, really seriously at the top of the tree, is being able to be really open and vulnerable in that space to build that trust and to show them how that develops as the relationship between your staff members and yourself develop, exactly the same as it develops in the relationships with women and their families.
Yeah. And by the sound of it, from a business perspective, that makes total sense, that it's not profit above all else, but you would protect your staff and protect them from burnout and have reduced staff turnover and not people leaving at the end of their wick.
Look, I would say that probably one of the things that is still really critical in this space is burnout. Like, it is still a really big issue, and it's one that we, as a company, from a business perspective, do look to address all of the time. And it's something that, we sort of in the last financial year looked at, okay, well, what do we need to invest in now? And what we need to invest in now, and we've started it in the last sort of couple of months, is looking at strategies around the staff and how we can actually deal with their wellbeing even better than we do now, because I recognise that particularly as people that are givers, this is a giving sort of space, that we need to be really tuned in as to what we do to fill their cups. And so, we bring them together, we talk to them about it and work out different things, where their values sit and what they would value as being something that would help them to actually increase their ability to fill their own cups. And that's, that's ongoing work. That's not something that, with a staff of sort of 40 plus women all working in a giving way, that's not a conversation that ever ends. It's kind of like just this trajectory of work in progress. But I guess it's the thing about realizing it and being present to it at the beginning of it that is the thing that makes a difference. If you're not present to it, if you've got a boss or a manager who's not really even thinking about those things, you're in a different space altogether, aren't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So you're saying that it takes more than just a once a year "Are you okay" day and putting some things in the break room?
Oh, look, it takes, the communication process, it takes a daily and hourly tune in. It's not something that ever goes away. And I guess for me, for me to fill my cup, I need to be able to, for me to step out and do that as with my own family and in my own life, because I have to come in and there's all of that goes on every single day, every single hour. That's what I see my job as, is making sure that they are, it's not about an annual performance review. It's about a, conversation that goes on every day, or, however often it needs to. So, yeah, that's funny, really, when you think about it, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Liz, thank you so much for today. Now, if people want to find you, and if mums want to find you, how do they find you?
The best way is to just jump onto our website, with www.mymidwives.com.au, and there's form fills on there, and they just generally reach out via that or any of the other methodologies. I'm the beginning and end of Instagram. So, like, people often reach out via Instagram, which becomes then my full-time job nearly, because it gets overwhelming. But, we absolutely, members of the team will touch in with anyone that wants to reach out to us in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. And congratulations, you won an award recently on the Mumpreneur Awards.
Yeah, no, I mean, that was a funny old business, really. I didn't expect that at all, and particularly the level of success across so many different categories was kind of a bit of a shock for me, but lovely, and it is. I think the fact that I'm a mum as well is very much central to my own makeup, and my own mothering journey has impacted me significantly in that space. So it was quite a chuffed, I was quite chuffed with it. So
It was lovely. Liz, thank you so much today. I wish you every success. And like Liz said, if you do want to find her, she's at www.mymidwives.com.au. Thank you so much, Liz. I love this discussion. It was so beautiful. Thank you so much, Liz. That was such a beautiful discussion. Thank you for sharing your experiences with us. If you would like to find out more about My Midwives, you can go to mymidwives.com.au. And if you would like to find out more about empathy training, so learning more about what empathy really is, why it's important to you and your business, and how to really communicate with empathy, you can go to empathyfirst.com.au. My name's Leanne Butterworth, and that was the Empathy Podcast.